Red Hollow was the kind of town where nothing ever truly changed. People grew old in the same houses they grew up in. Kids played on the same sidewalks their parents once did, and the seasons rolled in and out with a quiet rhythm. Outsiders often said the town felt frozen in time, as if it had been lifted from an old photograph and planted into the present day. Yet beneath this calm surface, Red Hollow held secrets that locals preferred not to disturb. One of those secrets began with a name nobody wanted to say out loud: Ridgeview Academy. Emma Hale had never heard of the school until she stumbled across it by accident. She was browsing a Saturday flea market, looking for old books and antiques she could use in her college documentary project. Most stalls were selling the same things: old lamps, outdated VHS tapes, chipped jewelry cases. But one wooden crate stacked beneath a table caught her attention. It was filled with faded pamphlets, dusty postcards, and yellow town documents. Buried among them was a glossy brochure, surprisingly well preserved. On the front was a group of smiling teenagers dressed in neatly pressed uniforms, standing in front of a large brick building with a tall clock tower. Above them, in bold gold letters, it read, Ridgeview Academy, shaping tomorrow's leaders. Emma frowned immediately. She had lived in Red Hollow since she was born, and she had never seen a school like the one on the cover. There were only two secondary schools in town, Red Hollow High and the small private St. Barrow's Academy. Neither looked anything like the grand building on the brochure. She flipped it over. The school motto was printed on the back, along with a date, September 2002, as well as an address listed on Eastwood Road. It didn't make sense. She knew Eastwood Road had nothing but forest and an old abandoned water tower. She approached the stall owner, an elderly man with a wrinkled face and tired eyes. She asked him where the brochure came from. He looked at it for a moment as if it stirred a memory he wasn't sure he wanted to recall. Then he shrugged and said he found it inside a box of old town stuff purchased from an estate sale. Nothing more. Nothing else. The answer felt incomplete to Emma, but she let it go. She paid for the brochure, slipped it into her bag, and continued browsing the market. But the image of the smiling students stayed with her, and the strange feeling that something about the brochure wasn't right followed her home. That night, curiosity turned into obsession. Emma sat at her desk, lit only by the glow of her computer screen, searching for any mention of Ridgeview Academy online. She typed the name into every search engine she knew. Nothing. She checked school directories, old map scans, historical archives, and even obscure forums. Nothing. It was as if the school had never existed, despite the glossy brochure claiming otherwise. After nearly an hour of searching, she found one tiny clue buried deep in an old forum from 2003. Someone had posted a short warning: if you live in Red Hollow, don't go near the Ridgeview property. The school was shut down after what happened. There were no replies, no details. The user who posted it had deleted their account. Emma read the message again and again. What happened? And why were there no records at all? She glanced at the brochure under her desk lamp. The students' faces, once cheerful, now seemed unsettling, almost too perfect, like generic pictures pasted onto a background. She decided she had found her documentary topic. She didn't realize that this single choice would pull her into a mystery that had been buried for over 20 years. The next morning, she took the brochure to her parents at breakfast. Both of them stared at it with confusion. Her mother squinted at the school building. I don't remember any academy like this in Red Hollow, she said slowly. Her father agreed, reminding Emma he had lived in town far longer than she had. Eastwood Road never had a school, he said. It's always been empty forest. For most people, that would have been the end of it. But Emma couldn't let it go. She had a feeling that something important was hiding behind the silence. After class that afternoon, she drove to the town hall. The building was old but well-kept, with creaking floors and shelves stacked with decades of local records. Emma approached the front desk and asked the clerk if she could look up historical information on Ridgeview Academy. The clerk, a stern woman named Margaret, froze. She stared at Emma for a long moment before asking her to repeat the name. When Emma did, Margaret hesitated again. Then she forced a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "There's no record of such a school here. Never was." Her tone was final, firm, almost rehearsed. But something about it felt wrong. Emma pressed a little, explaining she had found a brochure claiming the school had opened in 2002. Margaret's smile tightened. She leaned in, lowered her voice slightly, and said, It would be best if you focused your research elsewhere. Warning. Dismissal. Faye. Emma wasn't sure which emotion she heard in the woman's voice, but it only strengthened her determination. She politely persisted, asking whether she could at least check the land registry for the Eastwood Road property. Margaret seemed torn, studying Emma like she was deciding whether to say more or shut the conversation down. Finally, with a stiff motion, she led Emma to the archives room. She retrieved a dusty box labeled RV 2002 from a top shelf and set it on the table. As she walked away, she murmured, "I didn't give you that." Emma opened the box. Inside were several files with torn pages, water stains, and blurred photocopies. Most documents were incomplete, as if someone had intentionally removed key information. But one paper stood out, a land development approval form. It listed a construction permit issued for Ridgeview Educational Facility, signed by the former mayor. Emma stayed at the signature, surprised. If the mayor had approved the construction, why did the town hall clerk insist the school never existed? The paper included coordinates. Without waiting, Emma left the town hall, drove across town, and headed toward Eastwood Road. As she turned onto the narrow, tree-lined path, a strange feeling settled in her stomach. The deeper she drove, the quieter everything became. No birds, no wind, only the steady hum of her car engine. When she reached the coordinates, she expected to find nothing but trees. And in a way, she did. But there was something else too, something that made her heart pound. A rusted iron gate lay on the ground, half covered with date and moss. Vines tangled around its bars. An old wooden sign clung to one side. She pushed away leaves and debris until the faded letters came into view. Ridgeview Academy, Excellence in Education. She stepped back in disbelief. There was no building, no ruins, no remains, only forest, only silence. It was as if the school had never stood there at all, despite the sign that claimed otherwise. She turned slowly, trying to understand what she was seeing, when movement caught her eye. A figure emerged from behind a tree. A middle-aged man with tired eyes and a face lined by years of worry. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. His voice carried a warning, a history of things left unsaid. "Did you go to this school?" Emma asked cautiously. He hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like he might tell her something important. But then his face hardened. "There was never a school here," he whispered. "Not really. Not the way you think." Before she could ask anything else, he turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving Emma alone with more questions than answers. That evening, as she reviewed the footage he had taken, she realized something chilling. No matter what angle she recorded, the sign never appeared clearly in the video. The letters blurred, the image distorted, almost as if the forest itself refused to let Ridgeview Academy be seen. Emma didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped onto a path the town had spent decades trying to bury. And the deeper she went, the more dangerous it would become. Emma barely slept that night. Her mind kept replaying the moment in the forest, the rusted gate, the faded sign, the strange man warning her to leave. It felt like she had stepped into a story that had been kept hidden for years, a story no one wanted told. By morning, her curiosity had grown even stronger, but it was mixed with an unsettling feeling in her chest, something like a whisper telling her she was about to uncover something dangerous. She brushed it off as nerves and packed her camera, notebook, and a small flashlight before heading back to the town hall. She wanted to recheck the folder Margaret had given her, hoping she might have missed something. But when she entered the building, Margaret wasn't at the front desk. Instead, a younger clerk sat behind the counter, smiling politely. Emma asked if Margaret was available. The clerk shook his head and said Margaret had taken a sudden leave that morning. The news struck her as odd. Margaret didn't seem like the type to take unplanned days off. Emma asked if she could return to the archives room. The clerk agreed and handed her a visitor's badge. The archive smelled of dust and old paper. She made her way to the shelf where the RV 2002 box had been placed. But when she looked, the box wasn't there. She checked again, scanning the shelves carefully, but it was gone. Confused, she returned to the front desk and asked whether the boxes had been reorganized. The clerk shook his head and said nothing had been moved to his knowledge. Emma walked back to the archives, determined to find something. After nearly 20 minutes of searching, she spotted a cardboard lid sticking out from behind a stack of atlases. She pulled it toward her and felt her breath catch. It was the RV 2002 box, but it was nearly empty. Only a single sheet of paper remained. The land development form she had seen the day before was gone. The other documents were missing too, as if someone had cleaned the box out overnight. Emma stared at the remaining sheet. It wasn't anything important, just a generic town notice about zoning regulations. It felt intentionally placed, almost like a placeholder. Someone had taken the rest, and they had done it fast, right after she left the building yesterday. A cold shiver ran through her. Someone didn't want her looking deeper. She snapped a picture of the empty box just in case and left the town hall, unable to shake the feeling of eyes following her until she reached her car. She drove toward Eastwood Road again, thinking she might find the mysterious man from yesterday or at least get a better look in daylight. As she neared the forest, she noticed the trees seemed denser than usual. Branches hung low over the path, like skeletal arms reaching out. Even during the day, the woods had a strange heaviness to them. She parked her car at the same spot and walked toward the fallen gate. The sign was still there, but now something was different. The ground around it looked disturbed, a patch of fresh dirt, as if someone had recently dug there. She crouched down and touched the soil. It was still loose. She wondered what had been buried or removed. As she stood up, she felt a presence behind her. For a moment she hoped it was the same man from yesterday. But when she turned around, no one was there. The forest was silent except for the distant rustle of leaves. The silence felt unnatural, too perfect. She began filming again, hoping her footage might capture something her eyes couldn't. With each step deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. She knew the documents hinted that a building had once stood here, but there were no foundations, no debris, no signs of demolition. It was as if the land had swallowed the structure whole. Emma walked further until she reached a clearing she hadn't noticed before. At the center stood a cluster of concrete slabs half buried in the ground. They looked like the remains of a foundation, but they were arranged strangely, almost like a pattern. She touched one of the slabs. It was icy cold despite the warm weather. While she was studying it, a voice echoed from behind the trees. "Why did you come back?" Emma spun around. The same man from yesterday stood at the edge of the clearing. His clothes were worn, his hair unkempt, and his face drawn with exhaustion. He looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in years. Emma approached him carefully, not wanting him to retreat again. "Please," she said softly. "I just want to know the truth. What was Ridgeview Academy?" The man shook his head, rubbing a hand across his face. "You need to leave this alone. It isn't safe." "Safe from what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past her at the slabs on the ground, as if remembering something he wished he could forget. "The school wasn't supposed to be here," he finally said. "The land wasn't approved for anything like that. But one year, out of nowhere, they started building. No announcement, no public notice, nothing. Just construction crews arriving overnight." Emma listened intently. Her camera pointed toward the ground as if she didn't want to intimidate him. "Who were they?" she asked. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "People from out of town. People who didn't want their names known. They brought their own workers, their own supplies, even their own security. The town mayor signed papers behind closed doors, and suddenly this forest became restricted property. They said they were building a school for advanced learning, a place for gifted children." The story matched what Harriet Cross would later reveal to Emma, but she didn't know that yet. All she knew now was that the pieces were slowly beginning to align. "Did the school ever open?" The man nodded slowly. "For a short time. Maybe a year. But the children who went there," he stopped, swallowing hard. "They weren't seen after it closed. Not one of them." Emma's heart tightened. What happened to them? He opened his mouth to answer but froze suddenly, his eyes shifting to the trees. "We're not alone," he whispered. Emma turned, but again, she saw nothing. Still, the hairs on her arms rose. Something was off. The man took a step backward. His expression was full of fear now, not caution. "Go home," he said in a trembling voice. "Erase your footage. Forget this place. If you keep digging, they'll notice you." Before Emma could speak, he hurried away, disappearing through a narrow gap between the trees. She wanted to follow him, but her instincts told her not to go deeper into the woods alone. Instead, She left the clearing and returned to her car, her mind racing with questions. Who were they? Why was the school built in secret? And what could drive a grown man to such fear after 2 decades? On her way back to town, she tried to call Margaret, hoping the clerk might give her answers. But the call went straight to voicemail. She tried twice more with the same result. When she arrived home, she opened her laptop and began digitally scanning every document she had photographed so far. She noticed something she hadn't seen earlier. In the corner of the land development form photo, partially obscured by her thumb, was a stamp, RV Initiative, Phase 1. She tried searching it online, but nothing came up. It didn't exist anywhere outside that document. Just like Ridgeview Academy. As she sat back in her chair, exhausted, she felt her phone vibrate. It was a text from an unknown number. A single sentence. Stop looking. It's already gone. She stared at the message, her hands suddenly shaking. Someone knew exactly what she was doing. Someone was watching. And someone didn't want the past uncovered. Emma didn't know it yet, but the deeper she went into this mystery, the more the shadows around her would begin to move. Emma spent the rest of the day trapped inside a haze of worry and curiosity, 2 feelings that battled constantly inside her. The message from the unknown number kept replaying in her mind, each word echoing like a quiet threat. Stop looking. It's already gone. She didn't know how the sender knew what she was researching, or what exactly they meant by gone, but she had a sinking feeling that whatever she had just touched was far larger than an abandoned school. She didn't sleep well that night, waking up every hour to check her phone, her window, the dark corners of her room. Every sound felt sharper than usual. The house creaked. A dog barked far down the street. A car engine hummed quietly as it passed by. Each time, her heart jumped. By morning, she decided she needed help, or at the very least, someone who remembered something. There had to be someone in Red Hollow who knew about Ridgeview Academy before it vanished. She started by visiting the smallest and oldest cafe in town, a place her parents always said was the unofficial gossip center of Red Hollow. If anyone remembered old town rumors, it would be the regulars who spent every morning sipping coffee and discussing things that happened decades ago. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and old wood. A few elderly residents sat near the windows, chatting in slow, soft voices. Emma approached the counter and ordered coffee, then leaned forward, pretending to sound casual as she asked the barista if she knew anyone familiar with local history. The barista nodded and pointed toward a woman sitting alone in the corner booth, reading a thick novel. Harriet Cross, she whispered. Retired history teacher. Lived here all her life. If the town ever had secrets, she probably taught them. Emma thanked her and approached the booth. The woman looked up from her book. Her hair was silver, pulled into a neat bun, and she had a sharp, knowing gaze that made Emma feel like Harriet could see right through her. You look like someone with questions, Harriet said before Emma could even introduce herself. Emma blinked, surprised. Yes, actually. My name is Emma Hale. I'm working on a documentary about Red Hollow's hidden history. Harriet raised an eyebrow. And which piece of history are you digging for? Emma hesitated, then decided honesty was her best chance. Ridgeview Academy. The look on Harriet's face changed instantly. Not shock, not confusion. Something like dread. Something like resignation. The older woman closed her book slowly and gestured for Emma to sit down. I knew this day would come, she murmured. Someone young, curious, and stubborn enough to go looking. She took a long breath, as if gathering strength. What do you want to know? Everything, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harriet looked out the window for a long moment, watching a few children skip across the sidewalk. I suppose you already learned the obvious, she said. How the school appeared suddenly, how nobody in town was consulted, how it closed before we even understood what it was. Emma nodded eagerly. Do you know why it closed? Harriet's eyes shifted back to her. I know why the town forced itself to forget, she said. That's not the same thing. Emma leaned forward. Please, I need to know. I've already found documents and spoken to someone who said the children who went there never came back. Harriet stiffened, confirming the truth Emma had feared. You spoke to someone, the old woman asked slowly. Who? Emma described the man without naming him. Harriet closed her eyes. Daniel Foster, she said quietly. He was the groundskeeper. He lost his son. Emma froze. His son went to Ridgeview. Harriet nodded. One of the first students. But Daniel was never given any answers. Only a closure notice and a warning to keep quiet. Emma swallowed hard. She felt suddenly guilty for rushing Daniel with questions, not realizing the burden he carried. Harriet continued. Back then, the school was said to be an advanced learning center. Parents were told it focused on gifted children, special programs, accelerated education. She smiled bitterly. Too good to be true. And yet many parents enrolled their kids. Some out of hope, some out of pride, some out of pressure. Emma asked what the school was actually doing. Harriet's voice dropped lower. We still don't know. But strange things began happening the moment the children started attending. They stopped talking to their parents. Some forgot their own birthdays. Some woke up in the middle of the night screaming about loud noises, bright lights, and shapes watching them. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Did the town investigate? Harriet shook her head. We tried. But the administration shut us out. The staff never mingled with the locals. They avoided all public events, kept their faces hidden, and never gave out full names. When the mayor tried to schedule a surprise inspection, he was suddenly transferred to another district. He left town within 2 days. Emma had never heard any of this before. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled down every word. Harriet watched her, then gave a tired sigh. After a year, everything reached a breaking point. One morning, the parents came to drop off their children and found the gates locked. A sign hung there saying the school was permanently closed. No explanation. No warning. Staff gone. Students gone. Emma looked up sharply. Gone. Gone where? That, Harriet whispered, is the question that destroyed this town. She paused, clasping her hands as if trying to steady herself. Some parents claimed their children had vanished the night before. Others swore their kids were never enrolled to begin with, even though the rest of us remembered otherwise. Files disappeared. Photos disappeared. Report cards disappeared. It was as if someone had wiped away every trace of those children. Emma's skin prickled. How could people forget their own children? Harriet gave a humorless laugh. Grief can do strange things. Trauma even stranger. But what happened in Red Hollow was neither. Something interfered. Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Interfered how? Harriet didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table. I kept this for 22 years, she said. I never showed it to anyone, not even the parents. But perhaps it's time. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside was a photograph. A group of schoolchildren stood in front of the large brick building, the same one from her brochure. But something was wrong. The children's faces were blurred, every single one, as if smeared with motion despite the rest of the image being perfectly still. The building, though clearly the same one on the brochure, had shadowy figures in its windows. Tall figures. Watching. The longer Emma stared, the more nauseous she felt. Harriet reached out and touched her hand gently. The school didn't vanish, she said softly. It was removed. Whatever had been done there needed to be erased. Emma felt her throat close. Why are you telling me all of this? Harriet leaned in closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because someone brought the school here. And now someone is trying to bring it back. Your digging is drawing attention. The moment you found that brochure, the moment you stepped into those woods, they noticed. Emma looked at the photograph again, hands trembling, her mind spinning with terror and disbelief. Who are they? Harriet's eyes darkened. Not who, she said. What? Before Emma could ask more, Harriet suddenly tensed. Her eyes flicked toward the cafe entrance. A man in a dark coat had just walked in. He wasn't buying anything. He wasn't looking at the menu. He was scanning the room. Searching. Harriet grabbed Emma's wrist. Go out the back door, she whispered urgently. Now, before they see you. Emma felt her pulse skyrocket. She grabbed her notebook, shoved the photograph into her bag, and slipped out of the booth. Harriet stayed seated, opening her book as if nothing had happened. Emma hurried toward the rear exit, heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. But as she pushed open the door, she couldn't stop herself from glancing back. The man was staring directly at Harriet, and Harriet stared right back, her expression calm but defiant. Emma stepped into the alleyway behind the cafe, breathing heavily, her hands cold. She didn't know who the man was or who he worked for. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was being watched. And whatever had happened at Ridgeview Academy 22 years ago was beginning to wake up again. Night settled over Hollow Creek with a heaviness that made the air feel thicker than usual, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Detective Marlowe sat in her car outside the old school building, the engine off, letting the silence wrap around her. She had spent the entire day piecing together testimonies, rereading the town's archival records, and calling every agency she could think of. The result was a pile of contradictions, all pointing to one chilling truth. The school had stood here before. It had operated. It had students. It had teachers. And yet no one remembered it clearly, and no official record admitted it existed. She stepped out of the car and the gravel crunched under her boots. The school doors were unlocked again, just like the previous nights. She pushed them open slowly and the faint smell of mildew and old paper drifted out. Her flashlight beam cut through the dust floating in the air, and as she stepped inside she felt an uneasy awareness creeping up her spine, like someone was watching from behind a doorway or from the darkness above the staircase. She walked through the hallway first, noting how some of the student drawings on the walls had changed since she last saw them. One sheet that had been blank before now showed a crude sketch of a tall figure standing behind a group of children. The children had no faces. The tall figure did. It looked disturbingly human, but the eyes were hollow circles. Marlowe swallowed hard and kept walking. The wooden floor groaned beneath her, echoing down the corridor until she reached the main office. She turned the knob and found the room exactly as she left it, except for the file cabinet. Yesterday, all the drawers were empty. Now one was slightly open. She approached carefully, half expecting something to jump out. Instead, she found a single folder sitting inside. The label read, "Class Roster." Her heartbeat quickened. She pulled the folder out and flipped it open. Inside were pages of names, dozens of them, each followed by a faded black and white student photograph. But the most disturbing part wasn't the number of students. It was the fact that the photos were not blanked or scratched out like she had seen in other abandoned cases. These students were staring straight at the camera, with hollow expressions that felt too still, too vacant, too unnatural. Some looked frightened, as if caught seconds before something terrible happened. One face stood out, a girl with long braids and wide eyes that seemed strangely alive despite the old film grain. Marlowe had seen her before in the drawings on the hallway walls. She whispered the name under the photo. Claire. A loud crash echoed from the second floor, startling her. She spun around, flashlight shaking, but saw nothing. The building had been empty for decades, or so everyone claimed, yet the sounds inside never matched that truth. She placed the file under her arm and made her way toward the staircase. The old wood felt unstable as she climbed. Halfway up, she noticed faint child-sized footprints in the dust. They led up, toward the classrooms. At the top, the hallway felt colder. She exhaled and watched her breath cloud in the air even though it was a warm summer night outside. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, a third time. She slapped it lightly, and the beam steadied, though the hallway seemed darker than before, the walls almost absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. She moved cautiously toward the classroom at the far end. The footprints continued toward the same door, disappearing beneath it. She turned the handle slowly and pushed it open. The classroom was filled with desks, all arranged neatly as if waiting for students who would never come. But that wasn't what made her stop in her tracks. Sitting at the front of the room was an old reel-to-reel film projector. The projector turned on by itself, its reel spinning loudly as the screen illuminated with flickering white light. A moment later, an image appeared. It was a classroom. This classroom. But instead of being empty, it was filled with children sitting at their desks. They were silent, staring straight ahead, not moving even as the film continued to roll. Marlowe stepped closer, her heart pounding. The hair on her arms stood upright. The screen shifted to show the teacher standing at the front, a tall man in a dark suit. His face was blurred not from damage to the film but intentionally, smeared out as though someone scratched only that part before duplicating the footage. The teacher raised a hand, motioning for the class to stand. The children stood in unison. They recited something, but the film had no sound. Marlowe took another step forward. Then the film changed again, this time showing the children sitting but slowly turning their heads toward the camera. All of them. At once. Milo felt a chill run through her entire body. The children's hollow eyes stared directly at her, as if they could see through the screen. Suddenly the projector shut off. The room went pitch black. Milo spun around, pulse racing, and the beam of a flashlight came back on abruptly, illuminating the whiteboard behind her. Fresh writing now covered the surface in messy black marker. Stop digging. She stepped back but bumped into something. For a split second she froze, not wanting to turn around. When she finally did, her flashlight revealed nothing but empty air. She exhaled shakily and forced herself toward the door. But the moment she reached the hallway, she saw movement at the other end. 5 small silhouettes stood in a row, blocking her exit. She lifted her flashlight and the beam revealed what she feared more than anything. Children. Not living ones. Pale, translucent, their faces blurred except for their eyes, which were black and hollow like the drawings downstairs. They stood motionless, watching her. One girl stepped forward. The one with braids. Claire. Her voice came soft and distant, like it traveled through layers of air. "You're late," she whispered. Milo's breath caught. Her legs felt glued to the floor. Claire raised an arm and pointed toward the staircase. "His coming." The silhouettes vanished. The hallway fell silent again, but Milo no longer felt alone. Heavy footsteps echoed from the floor above, slow and deliberate, as if something very large was walking through the building with purpose. She didn't wait to see what it was. She turned and ran down the stairs, through the hallway, and out the front doors. She didn't stop until she was inside her car with the doors locked and the engine roaring. The school stood behind her, quiet and still, but she knew something had changed. Someone, or something, inside that building had noticed her. And it wasn't done. Detective Marlowe barely slept after fleeing the old school. Her mind replayed the images again and again, the pale children blocking the hallway, the writing on the whiteboard, the girl with braids whispering that someone was coming. When the sun finally rose, she felt no comfort. The daylight didn't erase what she saw. It only made the truth harder to ignore. She drove back to the station with the class roster file on the seat beside her. Every time she glanced at it, she felt a strange pull, as if the file itself wanted her to open it, to keep digging even though she had been warned not to. When she reached her desk, she spread the papers out and took a deep breath. She decided to start with one name. Claire Matthews. The girl with the braids. The girl who appeared in the drawings. The girl who had spoken to her in the hallway like she was still alive. Marlowe typed Claire's name into every database available. School records. Missing persons. Birth records. Death reports. Nothing. Not a single document confirmed that Claire ever existed. But the photo in the roster file said otherwise. It showed a girl who had lived, breathed, and smiled once. A girl who had sat at a desk in a real classroom. A girl who had been erased from history.
Marlowe leaned back in her chair, staring at the wall as a troubling thought pushed its way into her mind. What if the school didn't just disappear? What if someone made it disappear? What if someone wanted every memory of it wiped away? She returned to the file and flipped through the pages again. Now that she looked closer, she noticed faint marks beside some of the names. Tiny slashes shaped like tally marks. 1 slash next to some. 2 next to others. And next to Claire's name, 4 slashes. She didn't know what it meant, but she didn't like the pattern. She pulled out the faculty list next. Only one teacher had an intact photograph. Mr. Alden Hargrove. His face was stern, his eyes oddly dark even in the faded photo. His expression was forceful, almost angry. She examined the back of the photograph and found something handwritten in pencil. Last day. Do not return. Her heartbeat quickened. Was he the man in the film? The figure whose face was blurred out. She zoomed the photo on her computer, looking for details in the background. The image had been taken in a classroom. The same classroom where the ghostly projection had played. The match was perfect. That meant Alden Hargrove wasn't just a teacher. He was the teacher. And if Claire's warning was real, he was still here. Still walking the halls. Still watching. She needed to learn who he was. She dug through old news archives. Most searches came up empty, but after hours of digging she found something. A A small newspaper article from 30 years ago. No photo. Just a headline. Local school suddenly closes after incident. The article was short, vague, and strange. It mentioned a teacher accused of inappropriate and dangerous practices. It mentioned students falling ill without explanation. And at the end, it read, "The teacher in question cannot be located." That was the last known trace of Alden Hargrove. Marlowe printed the article and slipped it into her file. She knew what she needed to do. She had to go back to the school. Not at night this time. Not when the shadows twisted into strange shapes. She needed to see it in daylight, to prove to herself that the figures she saw were just ghosts trapped in a memory, not something worse. She drove to Hollow Creek in the late afternoon. The sun was sinking slowly but still bright enough to cast warm light over the abandoned building. It looked almost normal in daylight. Quiet. Empty. Safe. She stepped inside again. This time, the hallways felt less threatening, though still charged with a strange, heavy energy. She walked straight to the principal's office, hoping daylight would reveal details she missed before. The chair behind the desk was no longer empty. Someone was sitting in it. Marlowe froze as the figure slowly turned to face her. It was a young girl. Claire. Her braids hung over her shoulders, just like in the photo. But something was different. She didn't look ghostly now. She looked almost alive. Almost. "You came back," Claire said softly. Her voice echoed slightly, as if she were speaking from far away even though she was only a few feet away. Marlowe stepped closer, unsure whether to be afraid or relieved. "Claire," she whispered. "What happened here?" Claire didn't answer at first. She looked toward the hallway, as if checking whether someone was listening. Then she turned back to Marlowe. "He won't let us go," she said. "We tried. Many times." Marlowe crouched to be at eye level. "Who? Mr. Hargrove?" Claire flinched. "He wasn't always like this," she said. "Before the last day, he was kind. Strict, but kind. Then something changed. Something came into him. Something dark. It whispered to him. Told him we weren't listening. Told him we needed to be punished." Marlowe's throat tightened. Claire continued. "One day he locked the classroom doors. He made us sit. He kept teaching even after the sun went down. He said we couldn't leave until we understood the lesson. But there was no lesson." Claire's expression twisted as if remembering something painful. "We never left that room." Marlowe felt a cold wave pass through her. She stood and looked around the office, suddenly noticing faint handprints on the walls, small ones, too many to count. "Why did the school disappear?" she asked. "Everyone forgot. All the records vanished." Claire nodded slowly. "He erased it. He didn't want anyone to find us. He wanted his class to stay forever." A loud creaking sound echoed from the hallway. Claire's eyes widened with fear. She reached forward and grabbed Marlowe's hand, her touch icy cold. "It's too late," she whispered. "He knows you're here." The room darkened instantly as though the sun outside had been swallowed whole. The shadows lengthened across the floor. Footsteps sounded from the hallway, slow and heavy, exactly like the footsteps Marlowe had heard before. Claire let go of her hand and stepped back. "Run," she said. "He won't let you leave if he reaches you." Marlowe didn't hesitate. She sprinted out of the office, down the hallway, and toward the exit. But as she reached the front doors, they slammed shut with unnatural force. She grabbed the handles and pulled, but they wouldn't budge. The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing off the walls like a drumbeat. She turned and saw a dark figure at the end of the hallway. Tall. Motionless. Watching her. She lifted her flashlight but the beam flickered and died, leaving her in near darkness. The figure took a step forward. Then another. Marlowe backed away, searching for another exit. She darted into a side hallway, knocking over a stack of old chairs. Behind her, the figure quickened its pace. She slipped into a classroom and shut the door quietly, pressing her back against it, breathing hard. The room was dim, but something on the chalkboard caught her eye. A message written in shaky handwriting. "Let us out." She turned back to the door. The footsteps had stopped. Silence filled the hallway, thick enough to choke on. She didn't know whether he was gone or waiting just outside. She crept toward the windows and tried to push one open. It slid up easily. Too easily. She climbed out and dropped to the ground, scraping her hands on the gravel. She ran toward her car without looking back. Only when she reached it did she dare glance over her shoulder. The school stood quietly as if nothing had happened. But in the second-floor window, a dark silhouette stood watching her again, unmoving. She got into her car and sped away. As she drove, she looked at the passenger seat. The class roster file lay open. But something had changed. New writing covered the last page. One more name added. Elizabeth Marlowe. She swerved the car in shock. Her name. Added to the class list. To the students who never left. She turned the pages with trembling fingers and found a new photograph at the bottom. Her own face staring back at her with hollow eyes. She snapped the file shut and threw it into the back seat, breathing fast. The school wasn't done with her. It never would be. And now she understood the truth. The school did exist. It existed in every place that was forgotten, every corner lost to memory, every shadow that refused to fade. It existed because something inside it wanted to keep existing. And now it had chosen her. Detective Marlowe pressed her foot to the accelerator and drove into the fading light, hoping she could outrun the pull of the place that should never have existed. But deep down, she already knew the truth. You can run from a building. You can run from a memory. But you cannot run from something that has already taken your name.